All right. So let's just start from the beginning.
This is The Cross Section with Nate Lull and David Edelstein. Featuring special guest, David Smith.
All right, so let's jump into it. How are you doing?
Good, man. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Yeah, Memorial Day weekend. And I guess they say it's the official start of summer. I can tell you that I think the official start of summer was really this past week with how hot it's been outside. But wasn't it snowing like just 2 weeks ago? And then that day it turned into 80 degrees.
It's been crazy because I can remember it was a weekend, I mowed my lawn, and then it snowed that Monday. So
it's cool,
it was a little wacky.
Yeah, it's cool to see the grass, though, change back to the green color, because it seems like within a matter of 2 days at most, everything outside went from being completely bare and it was flurrying a little bit outside to completely green in a matter of hours and pollen everywhere. So I feel bad for anyone who has allergies. I fortunately do not have that.
Well, I had one thing I wanted to toss in here before we really roll on to some of our subjects, but normally this weekend would be absolutely insane for me. We would normally, the radio station, we have our biggest event of the year this weekend. We covered the General Clinton Canoe Regatta, which is a 70-mile canoe race from Cooperstown to Bainbridge. And it's a 4-day event, concluding on Monday, usually, where they have a huge race, including some pros. And usually, like, my head is spinning around right now because we cover all 4 days of it. And it's so weird to be home and just doing regular things. So it's definitely a strange weekend, but I guess that's the times we're in, right? So
yeah, I mean, about approximately 3 weeks in to there being no sports, someone in my newsroom asked our news director, "Hey, do you miss hockey?" Because he's a huge hockey fan. And his response I found was interesting was, "I don't remember hockey." Because just with how many changes there have been, and I completely agreed with that. And now this is going to be the 11th week of this being a pandemic, the 11th week now without sports. Think about that. There are 52 weeks in a year, 11 weeks, that's a fifth of a year we've done this already. And it's not that I obviously don't remember what it was like, but just the idea, while I'm walking around outside in this nice weather past week, of thinking, wow, imagine going to a baseball game right now, or a lacrosse game, or a softball game, and videoing it, doing maybe play-by-play, doing highlights, getting video coming back to the station and editing it together, and then on TV just talking about sports and baseball games and things, and a big highlight play. Can you imagine that as a job? And I'm like, oh, right, in a normal situation, that's exactly what and I'm sure in some variation you would be doing right now. And it's, this would be, we'd be getting towards May 24th, getting towards sectionals for the high school.
Yeah.
But it's almost like it's just so different that the calendar year's kind of changed. Kind of the same thing, like, when you're in school, you have like the events that come up and you're kind of like, okay, I know what time of year we are because of what break I have or what weekend it is. But then once you're in the working world, you're kind of like, well, you just keep going.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of like the calendar's thrown off. And yeah, this would have been a very busy weekend, and even just for gathering. People,
exactly.
Very different.
Well, we did have some good news that you can talk about that. Well, I don't know if it's necessarily set in stone, but you had some news that maybe we will have some sports coming back.
Yeah, the Major Arena Soccer League came out with an announcement this past week saying that they've been working hard on developing a plan for the playoffs. And they said that we plan to have the official release of the full plan within the next 7 days. So within the next week, I'll definitely be looking out for that. But I would say it's good news. It's the first news we've gotten that I can think of off the top of my head that's not saying, hey, we've canceled this. It's the first news that's actually saying a definite statement of, yes, we're coming back and we're finishing this thing, which is interesting for the Major Arena Soccer League, which, so we have Utica City FC is the team here. It's one of their first few years here in Utica. They used to be in Syracuse. And just like the Comets, the fans have really gathered around. They play at the Adirondack Bank Center where the Comets play. For those who might not be as familiar, because the Major Arena Soccer League is newer, is not a primary sport, we could say. It's basically, if you think about, the best way I've described it is, think of ice hockey, all the rules of ice hockey, but now turn that actual arena, like the same exact size of the ice almost, into a turf field with, and you're playing soccer. Like it's soccer, small, the ball bounces off the wall, it doesn't really go out of bounds unless you kick it out of bounds. There are power plays, there are penalty kills, where you have more than, you have an odd number of people on the field, just like ice hockey. It's not exact, it's a mix between ice hockey and soccer. It's soccer with the rules of ice hockey. So it's a very exciting sport. I mean, and Utica City FC was a very good team this year. They ended the regular season 16-7, tied for second in the Eastern Division. And the team was phenomenal. I'll go into some of the recognition that a lot of the players on the team got in a moment. But you're right, it is good news for sports fans to hear that the league is planning on having a playoff. I'll bring up some questions about that in a moment, but what the basics of this announcement said is that the highlights of the playoff plan, it would be a 5-day training camp for the teams, immediately into a 10-day playoff format. That's kind of a lot of games in a short amount of time, but it makes sense when you think of a little bit of the logistics about how they're not going to be traveling. It's all going to be played in one centralized location, just at one arena. They haven't announced which one that would be yet. And there would be 8 teams that make it. And Utica City FC would be one of those teams. Now, and then, of course, they said they're going to have an extensive plan for quarantining and housing and testing for the virus and all that. The biggest question I think that I had first was, why are they coming back? Because we look at all these other leagues, and you even look at how, right? The Utica Comets we spoke about a few weeks ago, and it was, they couldn't come back without having fans because the league relies so heavily on ticket sales, parking, merchandise. Same thing for Utica City FC, especially if they're not going to be any fans. They're going to still have to probably, pay the players if they're coming back like that. So why are they coming back? How are they logistically coming back? And if it took me a moment, but I thought it was interesting the first time I read this release, and then I went back. It seems, I haven't gotten this confirmed yet. I'm trying to get in touch with people from the team in the league, but it says in this statement, the belief exists that if we can safely conduct an event, that the world's attention to professional indoor soccer and the Major Arena Soccer League will be at a level never previously achieved. That's a quote from this release. This is a league that has there's no paid streaming. You go on, it's a YouTube stream for every game. You can watch it on YouTube. You could pay. It's exciting to be there. It really is. But you can watch these games. There's no revenue from streaming. They're not going to be making any money from having these playoffs. Why are they finishing it off? Especially if it's going to be so hard to do testing and everything. Because it seems the league is taking in, there are opportunities here to really promote just how exciting it is. And when there's no other sports, why not capitalize, I guess is their thought, on let's bring everyone's attention to the exciting Major Arena Soccer League, and maybe it really explodes going into the future.
I'll say that I would love if we could get something so close to home, fans or no fans, just to know that they were playing again would be really cool. And correct me if I'm wrong here, but in one of the statements I saw when they were choosing a site, they said Utica was a possibility to maybe host some of these playoff games. And my thought with that is, with how everything else is slowly opening up, are they really going to take the opportunity to bring in other teams from all over the country. And I think there's even a couple teams that are international. Are they going to take that chance, even with the testing, of bringing all these people to Central New York? I'm not against it, but I thought it was just an interesting call that maybe they would do that.
It is interesting. And I mean, I personally didn't actually see that Utica was in consideration. I just knew that the league had not yet decided. So I definitely want to look more into that personally, and we'll definitely get that information out to everyone. But it is an interesting thought because some people think when you're covering sports, it's like, oh, I'm just going to go to the game and tell you the final score and everything. But this is a moment in time where we realize that sports is about economics. It's about marketing and PR. It's about legal things too, law. And what is the governor allowing? The Mohawk Valley, which is our region of the reopening plan for New York that Governor Cuomo has set, is going through 4 phases, and we're in phase 1 still. It's going to take a while, I think, before, it was announced that the governor said you can't have large groups of people traveling in.
Right.
I don't know if there could be special considerations for something like that, especially if the league proposes how they're going to safely do this. I feel like Central New York might be a safer place, just as far as like there are less population density in this area than there is in a Baltimore or maybe even a Harrisburg, something like that. Harrisburg didn't qualify, but they could. The 2 teams, you're right. There's Sonora Soles and also Montgomery. Those 2 would have to work to travel across the border, and the league did mention they're going to try and work with that as the borders are closed from Mexico and Canada. And if not, they said that the 2 spots would be filled by the Harrisburg Heat and the Tacoma Stars. But there are logistics involved here. Imagine, the Harrisburg Heat might be sitting right now being like, wow, let's hope that the law, let's hope the law doesn't allow them to cross the border. I'm sure they're not really being malintentioned, but they make the playoffs if the team can't cross the border. It's kind of interesting how that works out, but of course it makes sense with the laws and legality and the pandemic. Yeah. It would be interesting if Utica was selected because obviously we talk so frequently about how the fans here, there wouldn't be any fans there, but how the fans are so around the team and that, the arena, the way it's set up for both hockey and Major Arena Soccer League it just brings the fans looking over the game and just makes it a tight-knit area. Of course, it's going to be there.
And hopefully I didn't misread that, but I thought, nothing had been decided, but that I thought it said that Rob Esch had been quoted as saying that he thought Utica could be a possibility for hosting some of the playoffs. And I thought, wow, that's interesting. On one hand, it would bring a ton of eyes and attention on Central New York and just how we treat our teams here, what a cool facility they have. But on the other hand, I wonder what the reaction would be from the general public. It'd be interesting.
Well, yeah, for sure. I think this is also in the same regard as the league was saying, an opportunity for any of these areas to be like, yeah, let's host the playoffs here. Because, you think about something like the Olympics. Why do places want to host the Olympics? Obviously, very different kind of event, much larger scale world event. But I'm using it as the example because places bid to host the Olympics because it brings that notoriety, it brings that prestige to a place. You have the facilities, you can say that you hosted. So in Major Arena Soccer League, yeah, if Utica became the place, or if any place became the arena where we're hosting the playoffs, we have every team here. Look at us, and this time there's no other sports, but Utica, it's that kind of prestige that you get to just talk about. And there would, if this were a case where we're like, yeah, fans could pack the place, it even adds that much more. I'm sure every stadium feels that it's unique in how it treats its fans and has its community and brings everyone in. Utica definitely does like to emphasize that, and it would definitely be an interesting experience if fans could be there. But of course, I imagine that it will not be the case unless, of course, they wait that long to have the playoffs, which they haven't announced the start date. They just said 5 days and 10 days of playoffs. Unless they waited that long, which could be pretty long time. So I doubt that there will be fans there by the time they want to do this. But again, it goes back to when they're allowed to. But I do want to go back for a second just to mention that this Utica City FC team really performed well, and so the league cut off the regular season. Utica City FC was 14-6, but they lost 3 of their the last 3 games of the regular season. They went on the first back-to-back losses of the season, and then it was the first 3 in a row. So, I mean, this team was good. And I'll go through quickly that on the first team for the league announced their all-star teams. The first team, midfielder Christian Segura made the team. He had a team-high 25 goals this year, 37 points, also a team-high, and he was 9th in the entire league in goals. And then on the second team, you had Jake Schindler, defender, and Anua Abasi, who actually joined in midway through the season. He signed with the team. So to make the second team in the league joining midway through was pretty impressive. He had 17 blocks, which was second on the team in block shots. Third team for the league, Darren Toby made it with a Utica City FC team leading 20 block shots. And goalie Andrew Coughlin made the third team. He had 16 games that he started, won 13 of those. He was also 5th in the league in goals against average, less than 5. And he was 8th in the league in save percentage. So, he put on quite a show. And there are many highlights that I have of him just blocking incredible shots. Every shot, it seems like, is incredible because of how small the playing area is. But he did a great job, really. And I just remember him. There was a game. I'm going to draw a blank right now on who they were playing against, so I'm going to pull it up here. But they were playing on the road, and this game, at the last minute, Utica City FC, literally in the final seconds, they blew the game. They were winning, and then in the last minute, they gave up a goal to tie it and gave up a goal to go behind. Then with just a few seconds left, like it had to be less than 20 seconds left, Utica City scores. So now it's tied going into overtime. No one scores in overtime. Yes, it was at the Sonora Soles, the team that would potentially make the playoffs if they can make it across the border into the United States. The final score was 12-11 in a shootout in favor of Utica City FC. Andrew Coughlin made amazing saves at the end there. I was watching this on the YouTube stream. It was a phenomenal game. And that game was used as an example of the excitement of the major arena soccer league. And I'm thinking that's what the league wants to show in its playoffs, that it would be. And the 10-day format would be the semifinals and the finals, 8 teams, 4 from each conference. So it will be interesting to see. And Utica City they had the best penalty kill in the league. They had a plus 35 goal differential. It was an exciting team to watch. They scored in double digits 5 times. So
that's crazy. Cool. Yeah.
Just to have any sports back, like you said at the beginning of this, is good news for sports fans, of course.
And I think it makes it even more interesting because of some of the other things that we saw come out this week that are more in regards to high school sports. And, that was quite a long list of rules and guidelines that we would have to get through. So to hear that maybe we would get to watch something else live, hey, I'll take it. So
at this point, why don't we bring in our first ever The Cross Section guest, West Canada Valley boys varsity basketball head coach David Smith. Coach, welcome to The Cross Section. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
Doing well. We were talking about how warm it is. We're trying to stay cool inside this week. There have been a lot of things going on in the high school sports world, even with everything being canceled. Just a lot of discussions about what's coming up for fall. So you're the head coach of the West Canada Valley boys varsity basketball team. So why don't you just introduce yourself a little bit for those who might not get to follow your team as much throughout the year?
Yeah. I'm the West Canada Valley boys varsity basketball coach. I also coach boys varsity baseball at Sauquoit. I've been at West Canada 3 years, and we were blessed to, I guess, end our season on a loss, because if we would have been going on, there would just be a hole in my rug going back and forth, pacing, trying to figure out what would have been. I don't know how the 2 coaches from Newfield and Weedsport have done it this summer. and even to keep the kids engaged, I guess, if anything, it's big motivation for next year for those kids. But yeah, we've had a great run. We've won two league titles in my 3 years there, and we've been to the semifinals twice. And we're hopefully this is the year we're going to get over that hump.
I kind of
Coach, I know you're a big AAU guy, and you're usually doing a lot in the spring and this time of year. Is that driving you nuts too? And are you able to stay in touch with your guys?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely been different. I've done, like, this weekend I took my kids. We just got back from in your neck of the woods in Garrettsville. I took the boys camping. And I normally would not have been able to do that. We'd be on the road at some AAU tournament somewhere, and I'd be dragging my kids into a gym for 8 hours on a Saturday and Sunday. So it's definitely been a different pace, and it's driving me crazy because I think our success has been driven on our off-season stuff, not stuff that we put in November. It's all the stuff that we do from March until, right up to the season starts. So that's been it's going to be interesting to see, like, where we are, what guys have done some stuff on their own in the off season. I have stayed in touch with them. I try to pick 2 or 3 every week just to FaceTime, check in, say hello. I don't want to overwhelm them. I know they got a lot going on. A lot of them, this is overwhelming for them in itself. So I don't want to be that guy that's just hounding them. Hey, what are we doing this week? But I usually send them workouts via text. Hey, listen, here's a workout Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Saturday, I try to get them to do some cardio stuff. But if they do it, that's great. If they don't, you can't enforce anything right now. You got to kind of let these kids figure out what's going on in the world on their own. So, but I definitely stay in touch with them. I text them, reach out to them as much as I think I should, or I just don't want to overbear them. I have a great relationship with my kids, and they know that I'm a phone call away if they need anything.
What's their reaction been when you have checked in with them? I've been doing a lot of sports features about the seniors, especially that have kind of lost their last sports seasons here. And, the reaction I'm noticing is a lot of, obviously they're disappointed, but they're trying to, in typical sports fashion, turn this into some kind of motivation going forward. When you speak to the guys, what is their just feeling? How are they processing all this?
Well, it depends. Like, I had 2 seniors on my basketball team, and I had a couple seniors that missed out on their entire baseball season. And when you talk to the seniors, you can definitely sense the sadness, right? I mean, for the one kid, he's actually Nate Rath. I'm sure you've heard that name. He's actually going on to play at Hartwick. He's going to play football. Another senior for baseball, Jaron English, he's going to go on and play at Onondaga Community College. So, I mean, the reaction is they're sad because they've missed out on a season, but for them, they're still blessed because they still have a season left. They're going to go on and play at the next level. And then you have kids, I have a really good core of juniors that are coming back, and they're just like, thank God it wasn't our senior year. And they're very, they're optimistic. They're hoping that we're going to have a season. Most of them play a spring sport, a fall sport. So they're hoping for that. I mean, it seems like, sports fashion, they're positive. They're going forward saying, hey, we're going to have a season. There's not a doubt in their mind that we're not. But, as coaches, and it's been discussion whole summer. I mean, it's not even summer yet, this whole spring, of what's going to happen here in the fall. So, but the kids they're resilient, man. I got 2 of my own. They're 9 and 7, the most resilient human beings you're ever going to meet. And I think it's just a matter of, as a coach, being positive with them and just trying to encourage them to stay engaged and stay in shape. I mean, that's going to be the toughest thing, man, because there's a lot of video games being played right now, and a lot of trash talk about video games. So, but I saw a video the other day, like 3 or 4 of my basketball players were out fishing. I don't think any of them even know what a fishing pole was before this. So, to me, there's so many positive things that this thing has actually brought. I think it's bringing kids together, and it's also bringing kids closer to their families, which it's there's some positives to this thing. It's hard when you got to tell kids their seasons are not happening, or hey, your high school career is just done. So I think that's the biggest shock to everybody.
What do you recommend to any seniors who might not know if they've made a team in college or thinking about potentially going, but they didn't get this last chance to prove themselves in a way?
Well, I think you can use it as motivation. The biggest thing there, I would be working as hard as I possibly could in this off season, so that when I walk on that college campus, that every coach on that staff knows who I am. I would come in the most absolute best shape I've ever come in, and I would just use that as my drive. My drive would be, I don't want this to be the end of my career, and maybe I'm on a bubble of making a team. Maybe I was not even thinking about playing college athletics, and now I'm really considering it, and I would just let that be my drive and motivation. So, I mean, that would be the one word of encouragement I'd give to them, is just say, look, go work. I mean, there's plenty of at-home workouts that you can be doing. You can use your basement, your backyard. The weather's been beautiful, so there's no excuse about that. But just get out and work. If you want to play, you can. You're going to have to work at it.
Coach, I know you and I talk quite a bit because you're originally from down in this neck of the woods here in Section 4, but and David can give us some more details on some of this as well. But you and I have talked a lot about what could happen next year, some of the rules that are in place, and we've kind of kicked our thoughts back and forth. So, I mean, what are you thinking right now? We've seen that New York State and some other places are putting some state and national panels together to make some rules and talk about this. I see one of your guys behind you right there. So,
yeah.
I mean, popcorn. What have you been thinking about all this right now?
I try to stay positive, Nate, and then everything that you hear and you're reading is like, well, how can we put these kids in a locker room or a gym together? I've heard that they're talking about delaying school until October, which would really put a damper on fall sports. I think here's one thing that's gotten me through all of this personally is I try not to think about it too much. I just try to go every day and think, okay, we're going to get ourselves into a season, and we just have to stay positive and mentally strong. I talk to my kids a lot all the time throughout the course of the season about mental toughness, and if there's any time to be mentally tough, it's right now. So it's hard because there's so many things and so many questions being asked, and are we going to have a season? How does it look? What does it look like? And I mean, do you just put kids, a certain amount of kids in the locker room and then bring out? I don't know. I don't know the right answer, and the experts are there to figure it out, I guess. And I know that they're struggling with it because we don't know on a day-to-day basis what's happening ourselves, and it's just a matter of we got to just kind of stay positive and continue to wait, but also, in the meantime, just keep our minds fresh.
That's a good segue into the NFHS guidelines that were released this past week for the return of high school sports, and the NFHS, of course, being the national high school organization, making recommendations this past week to the state high school sport organization. So in this case, the New York State Public High School Athletic Association. And I took a look at the 3 phases that they laid out, and just phase 1 alone seems obviously pretty intense, and obviously safety is first. But just to mention some of the things that were written in just what it would take that they're recommending to do for phase 1 is that teams locker rooms are banned. Shared water stations are banned. They're encouraging players to show up in their uniform and then immediately leave when they go back home and take off the uniform and shower. You can't even share any equipment. So, if it's baseball, for example, you can't share a ball, bat, helmets, gloves. It goes as far in just phase 1 to say that for football or any sport that uses a ball, no one else can touch it once it's touched by one person. So there's no such thing as a handoff in football or a pass. I was even talking with someone the other day, soccer. I was like, well, maybe they just kick the ball around for soccer, but then you have throw-ins where you're touching it, and those kind of things are banned. in the guidelines for phase one. And even it goes as far as that you can meet up in groups of 10 for practices, but everyone has to be socially distanced by 6 feet, of course. And you can only meet in those 10 pods. So how would you, even get your whole team together for a game? It's just amazing to me how intense phase one is. It makes me wonder when even that would be possible. I don't know if you got a chance to look at it, but just hearing those few parts of phase one, when would you imagine a realistic time is that something like that could start to happen? Just even with the logistics of how do you play a sport without giving the ball to, you just have to hold it yourself.
I don't think you can. I mean, I know that's such a generic answer, but I mean, how do you not pass the basketball? How do you not throw a football to somebody? And it's crazy. The Texas governor, and I don't remember the exact quote, but he's like, "You're telling me I'm going to have to tell Texas high school football we can't play football? That's not happening." Like and I get it. Safety is first, and everybody has their own political beliefs, their own beliefs on what this is and how to go about it. However, as a coach and as a school district, we have to play everything. We're at the mercy of what they tell us we can and we can't do. And I think that's the reality is, the fear is, are they setting us up for the fact that we may not have a season? What does that look like? I mean, what does this thing look like 2 years from now? It's just, you can drive yourself crazy playing, I call it the what if game. You can't play it. The what if game is just, it's going to stress you out. It's going to give you anxiety. It's going to say, all right. And that's going to be portrayed to your kids. And for me, you just kind of have to just be positive and not think about it, and just hopefully that we can continue to move on and move forward, and that this will all work itself out by the end of the summer.
Coach, if all this craziness continues and they delay fall sports, I know we've talked about on a couple other episodes, sports that they could maybe pull off, like cross country or golf or something like that. If it came to it, do you think your guys would be open to playing some sort of alternative fall sport just to stay active? Would that be where your positive message comes in about, guys, it's all we can do right now, like we got to do it? Or do you think they would just say, no, I can't bring myself to do that?
You saying this nicely, I would force them. I would force them to do something, and that's where I would try to step in and be a positive influence on them, because I think above, all right, the kids are more above the sport, right? I mean, I coach because I love the kids, and the kids play because they love the sport, but they also love the social interaction of it. They love being around each other. They love the idea of a team. So that idea of a team might look different in the sense of, hey, guess what? We have to play golf. Maybe we have to play run cross country, whatever it might be that just kind of gets them out of their houses, out of doing something with their teammates. I would almost force it if it came down to that, and say, look, here's cross country, here's golf, pick one. And if you don't do it, this is basically your tryout for when our season does start, because you need to start getting back in that mode of team and interaction and being around each other.
I know you're always open to other ideas. I mean, would you jump in and try to help one of those teams? I could totally see you being like, hey, you need a cross-country assistant coach. My guys are there. I'll come make sure they're getting it done. Like, what do you think about something like that?
Nate, I would just do anything I can to be around them. I mean, that's just, at the end of the day, if it meant me trying to coach or even just assist in a cross-country setting or a golf setting, I'd be all for it, just to be around my guys again. I mean, it's as much for me as it is them. I mean, I miss them so much, being around them every day. And I mean, we literally, up until this point, we were together for 12 months out of the year. I mean, we got done in end of February last year, and we were in our first AAU tournament in March, and we played all year. And we were in a fall league, spring league, summer league. I mean, we did it all. I mean, that's what our success is driven from. But I just miss them. So yes, I would do anything I can to be around them and hang out with them.
Now, the New York State Public High School Athletic Association mentioned this week that they will be meeting with their fall committee that they put together for the sports on June 10th. If you had a chance to be part of that conversation, if you were one of the ones kind of sitting around the table, the virtual table with everyone, what kind of things would you want to discuss with them, or what would you advise them as far as what it will take for fall sports to return this year?
I mean, listen, obviously, like we've talked about, safety is first and foremost, but I also think mental health is just as important. And I think you're going to see it more and more. Kids need that socialization. So I would encourage them, or have the conversation, like, how do we make this happen? How do we get these kids back onto a field, or back into a gym, or back into just being around one another? It was crazy. The other day I went to, it's called Sherrill Park. I don't know if you know it here in New Hartford. And I mean, I don't know what team it was, and I didn't want to know, because I thought it was really cool, and I hope they don't get in trouble, but they were having a practice. You could tell, and they were socially distancing, but they were having, it wasn't a practice with a ball. It was literally, they were working out, running laps around the park itself. Then there's like this big wide open football field. They were socially distanced, and they were doing some sort of workout. I don't know what type of team it was, who it was, but I think as coaches and as committees, I think it's really important that we find a solution or a way to get these kids back on a field, because I think the mental health is going to overtake what this pandemic has really done to all of us.
Yeah, definitely an important point that's not talked about as much as obviously the physical health, and the safety in all ways is the first priority. Nate and I spoke on one of our past episodes about the possibility for the alternative sports, like Nate just mentioned, but also as far as maybe doing different kind of sports that maybe more socially distant sports would be played in the fall, such as, baseball possibly, or softball, non-contact kind of sports. That was an idea that had originally been brought up on Twitter that we saw. Would that be something that you recommend to and would be open to as a coach yourself, for mixing around the high school sports seasons, just to kind of put them in an order where this sport could really be played now in a safe way, more than, let's say, a football or, a wrestling, which might be better later on when, maybe a vaccine comes out or something, and people could be closer with less risk?
It's funny you say that. That's a conversation that Nate and I have had in the past, that we think that baseball and softball should move to the fall. I mean, you think about the spring, and I mean, I remember our first game was scheduled for, I want to say, like March 31st. When's the last time in upstate New York we've gotten out on a baseball field on March 31st to play a game, let alone even have a practice outside? So I think, and then you look at the fall weather up until, usually right around playoff time for football, usually the weather is pretty good. I mean, you have a better chance, and you're playing in 60 to 70 degree weather, where I can remember games last year, it was like 48 degrees. I mean, I wouldn't even want to hit a baseball and make contact, because I can only imagine what that does going through your hands. But yeah, I mean, I think you have to start considering those things. I think you have to look at, here's the thing, we have to look at every angle. Same thing we've done with this pandemic, and what we need to do with social distancing and making sure we're doing all the right things to ensure the safety of everybody else. But we also, I think you have to kind of, in order to get it back, you might have to take fall and say, okay, we're going to do golf. Bowling is going to be in the fall. baseball, softball, you put those things in the fall and say, okay, football, we're gonna try to do it in the spring once they, what the difference is. Then maybe it's a vaccine, whatever it might be, but I think you have to consider that as an option for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, and we'll see what happens. I know that David and I have talked a lot about the guys who are the traditionalists and how's that going to go over, and maybe they're just going to have to kind of swallow it and say, hey, this is the only option we have. It's that or no sports. I mean, I'm open for whatever it takes. I just think it's going to be interesting to see how some of those old school, this is the way it's always been done type of guys handle this, and also how the people who have all these creative ideas, how that's all going to mix into one pot and make it work. So it's I think it's going to be interesting summer and fall.
We're all sports guys, right? That's why we're here. We miss sports so much. We want to have a podcast and talk about how the heck we can conglomerate some ideas and get it back. So these old school guys that say, okay, no, football's in the fall and that's it. Well, guess what? Then you may not have football. So if you're not open-minded to this whole thing, then you're not a sports guy. Personally, you're not a sports – I shouldn't say just sports guy. You're not a sports enthusiast. Because if you are, you're saying, okay, what can we do to get these kids back on some sort of field in some sort of athletics and playing? It's going to take committees and ideas and throwing ideas out there and bouncing them off one another. And if you're somebody that says, no, football is supposed to be played in the fall and baseball is supposed to be played in the spring and summer, okay, well then we don't do it. Then it doesn't happen. Yeah. And then then what? Then we have nothing.
Yeah, it's kind of a mix between, if you try and stick with it, then there's a possibility that nothing will happen at all. And is that worth just maintaining the traditional seasoning time? I did hear, of course, like you mentioned, the weather was one thing someone mentioned for baseball and softball, but also the fact that the days are getting shorter in the fall. So, the baseball games, they're typically earlier in the afternoon anyway in high school, but that, you get to the later innings and maybe the sun would be setting. But of course, bring in lights is always an option also. Just kind of, I always say, spitball ideas and you see what sticks on the wall at the end of it. I do want to transition for a second too to another conversation that Nate and I have discussed in the past, and we could run it by you now as an actual high school basketball coach here, that we were talking about the point systems for how Section 4 does their sectional seeding, and that Section 3 is obviously a little bit different in that regard. Your West Canada Valley team this year played 4 games against B schools, went 2-2. You played 2 D games, which were both wins over Oriskany. Would those be different considerations when you look at your schedule if there were sectional consequences for playing lower seeds based on winning and getting a certain amount of points or losing and losing a certain amount of points? Is either of the systems a better way, in your opinion?
I don't know if there's a better way. I think, like, for me, it doesn't matter whether it's a point system. I'm always going to challenge my kids and say, hey, we're going to try to play up as much as we can. I felt bad for Oriskany. I actually, my vote was for Oriskany's Rich Cook to get Coach of the Year in our league because of what he had to go through. He didn't have a choice, right? So his team is always fluctuating from C and D, and instead of just pulling him into a D league last year, they kept him in our division. So he played essentially an all C schedule. And then you had the reverse of that with Mount Markham, who went B this year, but they were stuck in a Class C league. So their entire league, their points were based off them playing C schools. And that's why, for me, if once I get out of my league, I'm trying to – it's not even playing up, but I want to challenge my kids so that when we get to those sectional games that, you know what, like, we're prepared. And we've been challenged and tested. It doesn't do anything for me to go and beat a team by 25, 30 points. It doesn't. It doesn't teach our kids anything. I try to give them lessons with that being said. But it really doesn't. I mean, that's why I embrace going to the Jugular Classic and playing last year's state champions in the championship game, West Jenny. I mean, it was a 7-point game at halftime. And it's just, I think as a coach, it shouldn't be about your schedule. It should be, how am I going to make my team better? Like this year, I have more C games, but it's tough C games. I got to go to Delhi. Delhi's coming to us. We're going to Cooperstown this year. So that's 3 games that, I mean, you're probably looking at those 2 teams are going to be in the top 10, 15 in the state. So to me, it's like, okay, I want to get out and challenge them because, one, I could end up seeing Delhi in regionals. So I want to get a look at them. And plus, that's my alma mater, so I think it's going to be a lot of fun to play them. And then for some reason, we scrimmage Cooperstown every year, but we can't get over the hump against them in the semifinal game. So I'm like, what? The heck with it. Let's go play them in the regular season, late in the season, and let's get a real good glimpse of what Cooperstown is all about. And then that way, when we know we're going to see them, because our road is going to go through them, then we have a better idea of what we're up against. So my schedule is always, I want to say strategically done, but yes, there is some math that comes into it. Like Frankfurt really, I mean, people thought they hurt themselves by only having 19 games, but you take your total points and you divide it by the total number of games, and that's where your seeding comes. So they ended up with a 4 seed. Was it 4? Yeah, they ended up with 4 or 5, I forget, but they end up with a higher seed with only like 3 or 4 losses, but it was because they only played 19 games. And then it's the challenge part, like who you're going to play, because if you lose to a D school, you're in trouble. I mean, you lose a ton of points by doing that.
Frankfurt Schuyler had the 4 seed, so you were right on point there. They wound up losing, actually, they beat Pulaski first, the 13 seed, but lost on Onondaga, the 5, which was a close one. But and you're right, you bring up an interesting point about Oriskany, because they played 13 Class C games as a Class D school. They only played 8 Class D games, so definitely outnumbered in that. And they also had a B on there too. They played Camden early in the season, so it's interesting to see how that kind of balances itself out as they move around. And I know that for football coming up, it's a different schedule, of course, but there are some schools that have bounced around and changed because they've been classified for this coming year. But how could you predict that, if it were based more on points in Section 3, that the AA, A, or B schools would view your team as a C school? Because there are more teams that are playing down, we could say, just down the ladder and down the class, than there would be for opportunities for you to kind of do that with D schools. Meanwhile, you'd continually be trying to, play maybe the B, the A school, but it seems like they might look at the C school a lot differently than they would otherwise.
Well, here's the thing. It's been it's funny because Nate and I talk about this often, scheduling, but West Canada is not exactly liked. And a lot of that is the tradition that's behind it. They've traditionally been known, I mean, we are, I would say, the Friday Night Lights of basketball. If you came to any of those sectional games, you saw it. I mean, that place was electric. And that's our fans. Our fans, our community have the most passion, I think, of any group locally. And we really showcase that when we play in the Mohawk Valley Classic. Every year we're invited back because we bring the most fans. And I mean, it's an attribute to them, but scheduling is awful. It's not awful. I have a great athletic director, and he does anything I ask him to, in the sense of scheduling, but people don't want to play us. And that's not just A's, that's not B's. We struggle to get teams that really even want to play us, because I personally think it's because we are traditionally good. And if you have a team that's weaker, some coaches like the challenge, some don't. So, and that's where I'm different. I'll play anybody. You call me and you say, hey, you want to play a game? Fine, set it up and we'll play. Because I'm not I'm not scared to play anybody. And that was one of the messages I was trying to send. And when we decided to play in that Jugular Classic this year, that was all AA schools in that thing. And we went in, I think we pulled off an upset and beat Notre Dame. We probably played our best basketball that night. And then, you know, we went against West Jenny, which they have 3 kids that have their D1 commits. And, you know, our kids, they like that stuff. They like that challenge. But the challenging of scheduling is getting teams to want to play you that traditionally maybe won't. And like this year, our crossover game, poor Old Forge. So our crossover game, we play Old Forge. And Old Forge also has to play Herkimer, and they also have to play Utica Academy of Science. And they're a small Class D school. But what a lot of people don't realize about West Canada either, we are the second smallest Class C school in all of New York State. And we are traditionally competitive in Section 3. I mean, just in the 3-year tenure I've been there, we've been a top 4 team in Section 3. And last year, we were the number 2 scoring team in all of Section 3 in every class, behind DeRuyter, who averaged like 80 a game, and we were at 75 a game. And DeRuyter was just unbelievable. I mean, there's a school, you want to talk about feeling bad for, it's them. I mean, when's the next time that team is going to get to where they had an undefeated season and looked like they were going to steamroll their way through winning a state title? So, and they face that challenge of teams not wanting to play them because they're Class D. So when you go to a C school and say, hey, play us, well, you're really good. Why would I want to do that? I'm going to go play somebody else over here. So that's the challenge of scheduling.
Yeah, it seems that it's kind of it's a game behind the game. You know, you kind of think about it's the strategy behind the actual strategy of playing basketball. I noticed, obviously, that your team was very passionate with the fans, rather, were very passionate at the games. I saw them with their newspapers, holding them up in the student section. And you mentioned Old Forge, which is interesting because they have they travel well too. So I'm sure if you play them, that has to be a pretty electric atmosphere. What was it like, both in the atmosphere, but also for your game in sectionals this year, when you were playing through the 3 rounds? I'm looking at the bracket right now, and it seems that offensively your team was very consistent in the sectional playoff play. And then, of course, in the Cooperstown game, they wound up winning 80-70. So what was the difference there, and what was it like just playing these top-level teams? The Final 4 there in the semifinals seemed to all really have a legitimate shot at taking the sectional title away.
And this is no offense to Nate Lull down there in Section 4, but I will say this, being a Section 4 guy and now coaching in Section 3, Section 3 is the brand brand of basketball in New York State. And I say that because every year there are the 4 teams that play for that sectional title all have a legit shot at winning a state title. I mean, the schedules that we all have played are brutal. You know, there is a game behind the game of challenging our kids throughout the year, making sure, you know, we lead into, you know, going into that sectional play like, hey, we're prepared for that. And it's also how important it is to get a top 4 seed, because that top 4 seed gives you 2 home games. And those 2 home games, I forget if you were there or not, David, either one of those, but man, literally walking down the hall to going to the gym after pregame, you could feel the heat radiating from the gym. And, you know, you're walking down and you have parents complaining, or not complaining, but just being like, man, I parked all the way up on Route 28 and down by this house, and I had to walk a half a mile to get down into here. And that's it. And part of that is our girls had such a great year, so they played right before us. So it was even more important to us that we had those home games, because then we got 2 home games together. And man, it just, as a coach, there's a picture of a shot going up, and I think it's against Beaver River. And I'm like, I do my typical lean as the shot goes up, trying to think that I'm going to be able to make it go in. And there's one of my players that's on the ground, and he's watching the shot behind us, the student section. And it was just like, that to me is what high school basketball is about. Wins and losses are awesome, but to have those kids have that experience, it only, you know, that's the stuff you're going to talk about. I'm sure that's the stuff, Nate, when everybody comes home for you, both of you are both athletic guys, like when your friends come home for Thanksgiving and you're all sitting around and you're having a couple sodas and you're just like, hey man, do you remember that time when we were juniors and our gym was at max capacity? I mean, those are just the things you remember and you talk about, and it's just so much fun. And our community is unbelievable. We have this group of guys. They're at every single game. We call them the old timers. And if you're in with them, you're okay. But the moment you do something they don't like, they'll let you have it. They will let you know. And Nate has the same thing in GMU. They have the two guys that have the wheelchairs. They sit at mid-court, and that's their spot. And the one game, it was weird. I'm a very superstitious guy, but I know where most of my parents sit. I know where those gentlemen sit every game. Well, there was no seats. So it was just go find a spot where you could. So that first game, it was a real big disarray because you didn't know where anybody was. But that's what leads into, I mean, Cooperstown, like the consistency you want to talk about. Man, and I'll tell you the same thing I've told my team. I screwed up. I was satisfied at halftime with a lead, and I didn't go in and make the adjustments that Coach Lampert did. I got outcoached. He made the adjustments in the second half. Third quarter, I mean, he came out and just punched us right in the mouth and didn't look back. I can't think of his name right now. The kid from Proctor who transferred in.
Kayshawn Jefferson?
Yeah, the Jefferson. He ate us alive. That we couldn't keep him in front of us to save a lick. And he split us at will. We spent so much time focusing on keeping Kennedy off the boards that he would get offensive rebounds. And then Ubner comes in and hits 3 straight threes. The kid didn't hit 3 threes all year and hits back-to-back-to-back threes on us. I mean, you score 70 points in a sectional game, you're supposed to win. And that's my first year we played Cooperstown. We held them under 60, and I thought we should have won that game. And then this year, I mean, we gave up 80 points, and the third quarter killed us. I mean, we were even in the fourth. We just in the third we failed to get the stops, and they just did a really good job of making the adjustments and finding the holes where our defense really was susceptible.
Obviously, it was a very impressive year. You had 2 players on your team, Andrew Soren, who made the 6th team All-State, and Jaden Beam, who made honorable mention, and they were exciting to watch all year. So, and you mentioned the girls team too, which I did get a chance to stop by West Canada a bunch and cover them. And maybe we'll have some guests from West Canada Valley Indians girls team on soon as well. The 2 other things that I was just thinking of asking you are more general, less specific to this situation, but I love to hear this from different people's perspectives. And so from your perspective as a high school coach, and having had the success that you've had with your team this year and in other years, what are 3 of the biggest lessons that you try and teach your players that you hope they remember, even if they don't remember anything having to do with the physical aspect of playing the sports?
I mean, number 1 and foremost is just mental toughness. That is a big lesson I try to teach them. I mean, that's something we talk about day 1 of preseason, and we still talk about on the very last day of the season. And I think that is because we live in a world that can eat you up. So it's not just mental toughness on the basketball floor, but just really teaching them, hey, you are a part of something and you are looked at differently as a student athlete. So your decisions on and off the court affect not just you, they affect all of us. So you have to, when you're in challenging peer pressure groups or people trying to get you to do things that might not be the right path, think about your teammates and think about us. So we talk a lot about that. Respect the game. I think if you look at my 3 years at West Canada, and Nate's known me before this in AAU and when I coached down at Unadilla Valley, I'm big on team. Not one player is going to put us over and above. Not one player is bigger than our program. And if you look at just our team this year, I mean, we had 2 kids in double figures. At one point, we had 4 kids in double figures midway through the year. One was a freshman, the other was a sophomore. And then you had Caden Ludwig, who is just a rebounding machine, and he's always in that 8-9 point game, 5 or 6 assists. So I really talk about sharing the basketball and being a team guy, and that comes from my love of the Bulls in the 90s and how they played, and they were just unselfish all the time. So I mean, that's team is really big. So mental toughness, team, and just respect for one another. You know, one of the lines I'll never forget, I had a player, she was really good, and she was, I don't know, probably arguing with the other girl on the team about she looked at her boyfriend wrong. And I pulled him in the locker room or into the coach's office and said, listen, I don't care if you two want to beat the crap out of each other in the hallway. You walk in this gym, we're a family. That's it. So whatever differences you have going out there, they can't carry into here, because if they do, it's going to affect what we're doing and where we're going. And I've really instilled that in all of my teams. And I think if you asked every kid on the team, like, what do you think of your teammates? They're going to say, I love them. And that's really what it's about. Wins and losses are great, but when you get kids to understand life lessons and life values, and they go on to be successful after West Canada Valley basketball, then I'm doing my job. I mean, Mason Schloop, I can't take any credit for that kid. I had him for 1 year, but he's a Division I football player. He's a 4.0. He's a PT. He's going for PT, and he's a 4.0 student playing at that high level. I mean, it just says something about him. Matt Tobin, he was my first year. He just signed. He's going, I believe, Division II to play baseball, since Herkimer was cut short, so he didn't really get to enjoy that full recruiting process of going to a junior college and then moving on. But like last year, I had Jake Smith and Tyler Franklin. Those two are both playing at the next level. I mean, Tyler's playing football at Morrisville, and Jake Smith is playing basketball at Delhi. So I mean, it's and they go to class and they get grades, and that's the most important. When they do those things, then I'm successful as a coach. Wins and losses, they're great, and everybody looks at you, and that's how you're graded as a coach. But I think overall, it's how I get my kids to play for me, which really shows. But then my relationship with them after they leave West Canada, I mean, I still text those guys all the time, and it's just, we're a big family. We're in group text. We've had, video chats, Facebook or FaceTime. I mean, it's just that's what it's really about at the end of the day.
And then I always love to ask, kind of as a final thought, do you have a favorite quote or a mentality, kind of phrase or something that sticks with you? And if so, what is it?
Man, that's on the spot here. I'm a big quote guy. Actually, every practice before we start practice, it starts with a quote specifically for that day. I believe it was Phil Jackson that said it, and he said, a hand is made of 5 fingers. When you make it a fist, it becomes one. Something, I don't know the direct quote from it, but that would probably, if there's one, it's that one, because it's, for basketball sense or anything, it's a team. And one of the things that I always say, and it's not a literal comment, but in the huddle of every game, I always start, I'm like, you guys have got to come out and deliver the first punch. Close your fist and just go out and punch somebody right in the mouth, and not even let them come back off the floor. And that's kind of like the mentality. And it's just, and I'm pretty sure it's Phil Jackson. I'm sorry, I'm terrible with like remembering quotes, but once I see it, I have them written down. But I'm pretty sure it's the 5 fingers and you close it to make a fist and you become one. And that's really what I want my kids to really endure and get that concept of it's us together. You know, we're the only ones out there in white. We're the only ones out there in purple, whatever it might be that specific night. And I just want those kids to really buy into that. And I think it really shows in what we've done. I mean, like I said, for 3 years, we've been a top 4 team in Section 3. So we're doing something right down there.
Well, I've definitely enjoyed watching the team play, and I'm looking forward to the time when sports come back. Appreciate you taking the time to share your insights from the coaching perspective, something new that we haven't had on this show yet. As Nate and I we're not coaches, but we've tried to analyze things, so we appreciate your expertise and your time too. Looking forward to being in touch, and of course, being back in West Canada Valley sometime soon for a game.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys.
That was great having Coach Dave on. As you can see, he's a wealth of knowledge, and he always has some great points. And I love having him on the radio with me from time to time when he's available and can make it down. But he's always been that guy, tight with his team, promoting teamwork. And it doesn't surprise me that he's staying in touch with his guys and reaching out and talking to them. That's the biggest thing that I think I took away from the conversation was just he would do anything for his guys. Like I kind of brought that up as a fun question, but hey, I would go help with golf or cross country. He wants to see his guys succeed. So I think that's the biggest thing I took away is that even though he's been around the game a long time, he's willing to make changes and whatever works. So I thought that was a really interesting point.
Yeah, so it's so important to be able to come up with the different ideas. And like we mentioned, this is a different time in the world, different time in sports. So it's going to take some different kind of ideas. And so you and I went back and forth on a bunch of them, and it was cool to maybe present a few or just kind of pick his brain on exactly what it would look like through the lens of a coach, someone who's, leading the team and is involved in the players. We're the ones kind of on the sidelines right now, but he's currently engaged in trying to lead a team through a pandemic, and it's something we've never done before, and the sports aren't. But it will be interesting to see how everything plays out, and of course we should definitely check in with him and others about how this is going to play out and see what their thoughts are as different decisions are eventually made. Because if there's one thing we know, is that sports will come back eventually.
One way or another.
That's like the length of a season. This is the length of a really long, weird off season of trying to get from one point to the other until the first game is back.